So thank you everyone for joining. Um, First of all, I normally don't start webinars this way, but I do want to say I'm sorry that you've had to join because you might find yourself in circumstances you didn't anticipate. But we do appreciate taking the time, and we hope that this session will be helpful to you as we talk about some of the ways that the industry typically reacts in periods of economic downturn, some of the things that we've experienced, and what we predict might possibly happen in this particular situation. And whilst we aren't, mind readers and we can't predict the future, there are some trends that we do see. We work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies on their L&D strategies, and we do see some of the things that people are doing and some of the trends that CLOs are leaning towards. And hopefully this might help you in the position that you find yourself in and how you might be able to future-proof yourself. We are recording the session for those who have been able to join or are unable to join, and we will be sending that out. And we'll also be sharing the slides for everybody if they would like to do so. And as Amanda has pointed out in the chat pod, we certainly are open to answering questions that if you want to ask those in private. We'll be sharing our contact details at the end of this session, and also too, you can find us on LinkedIn and send us a direct message. We really appreciate and understand that these are sensitive times, and we don't want anyone to feel exposed in the situation that they find themselves in. So without further ado, let's get started and talk about some of the things that you might want to be thinking about as we face this uncertainty. So in our careers, we've seen a couple of economic downturns, and to give some perspectives, and admittedly, neither one of these are at the scale that we're seeing right now or with the velocity that we've experienced, but we have seen these economic downturns. So first one would have been 9/11, taking place in 2001, and this was an incredibly large economic impact, particularly to the US, but it also had ripple effects, particularly in the air travel, in tourism, in hospitality, all of those things that we're seeing right now. And it was an estimated cost of around $55 billion. And so that was a massive hit. And I personally remember it happening, and do remember job losses. Do remember, L&D was one of the first things to be stopped. It wasn't seen as a priority, and certainly too, a lot of the same emotions and fears and things that we're seeing right now. So whilst it wasn't on the same scale, it was very much so a similar situation, and it really was a shock for people. The second economic downturn, which was not as quick, in fact, it was slow, was the one that took place in 2008, and that was a recession that built gradually, and it was a global one. So to give you some ideas, it was 18 months, which is an incredibly long time, and I think we're certainly looking at that amount at least for this situation with the pandemic. And it had a peak of 10% of people were globally, 10% of people globally were unemployed. So it was had severe impacts, and we saw a lot of industrial outputs declined, and it affected everybody. I just put some statistics in here. Japan, Russia, Germany. So all of these traditionally superpowers, they were really being hit by this. So it was really a difficult one. And I remember experiencing it at the time, and lots of people lost their jobs. Nobody was immune from it. So a lot of senior people, also too, really senior executives, were losing their positions. We used to see in Toronto, Bay Street is like the equivalent of a Wall Street, or the financial sector, and you'd see people leaving offices, in a suit and tie, and carrying a banker's box, a cardboard box, which meant that they had been walked out of their jobs. So they were pretty desperate times. So what typically happens in an economic downturn from an L&D perspective? The first thing is, as I mentioned, L&D is reduced or eliminated because it's seen as a cost center, and companies who are trying to maintain solvency, they're looking for places where they can cut, and L&D seems like the first place that they can go, and that's the first place that they are going to look. And then what happens is there is a switch. So to save money, in the 2001, that was when everybody said, oh, let's just go digital, because we know that classroom training is something that has a high level of cost, and we're flying people and all that sort of stuff. So 2001 was really the first wave of digital learning and a rapid acceleration towards that. And if you really want to think about what digital meant then, we were actually producing CD-ROMs. We were physically sending people CD-ROMs, and I cringe when I think of what damage we inflicted on people. And in the 2008 recession, there was, again, that switch to let's go digital, but it was more about how do we improve that digital experience. So we knew we could do more, so it pressed the accelerator on how we go to digital. And we're seeing the exact same thing happen now, but again, we've now had to leapfrog or go a lot faster because this pandemic happened so quickly. There was also, too, we needed to produce more with less, which is not uncommon. And the first thing when we started to see the rebound with when L&D started becoming, once again, a priority for business, it was with compliance. So it wasn't driven necessarily by the business. It was something it was something that was forced upon us. And I'll talk about that in more detail. Then people started to realize that L&D was strategic and indeed something they needed, which we know. And gradually there was that investment resumed in employee development, because they realized in order to attract top talent, to retain their strong performers, to grow as a business, to be able to pivot, they needed all the things that L&D could do. So what does this mean for us? Well, right now, the thing that we're seeing probably the most, and we work with, we've advised a lot of venture capitalists. First of all, we're going to see a lot of mergers and acquisitions in education technology. So that's probably going to be the first thing you will see. And this will come from a few reasons. First of all, we have it's a very saturated market. There are literally thousands of ed tech providers out there in some way, shape, or form. And people are starting to realize that in order to be viable, they need to either partner or they need to be acquired. The other thing too that is happening is, customers are looking at education suites. It's not necessarily one technology that does all. So if you read Red Thread research, they're saying that there's about 11 different systems people are typically using to run their ed tech stack. That's becoming very frustrating on the vendor side. And as they look to cut costs, they're going to be looking at those ed tech stacks. So it makes sense for these companies to be acquired or to merge. So that's something you're going to see coming up in probably the next 3 months. Unfortunately, that does often mean more redundancies. I'm just being completely transparent. But this is something that we're going to start seeing on the vendor side. But I also don't want this to be all doom and gloom, because there are things that are going to come out of this, and we've seen this from history. So while COVID-19, it's extreme, whenever we're faced L&D as an industry with a downturn, we really do pivot towards innovation. And I'm going to talk about some of the ways that has happened and where we think the innovation is going to come out of this. And the reason why it's important for you to know this is not just for interest, but also how you can position yourselves. Where do you want to be within this situation? So what happened in 2001 with the economic downturn due to 9/11, we found that industries such as banking and insurance, they didn't have money on hand. And this was a really big problem, and it led to government having to bail out these companies when they were faced with the economic downturn. And governments did not want to do that again. So what was implemented was something, it came out of the US, but it impacted globally. So I don't want you to think this is just a North American perspective. But they did something called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. I won't go into what all of that is, but essentially what it meant is, for L&D specifically, is we had to all of a sudden do a whole bunch of compliance training. Companies had to prove that they were training people on things like anti-money laundering, code of conduct, all these things that we really hadn't done so much before. And what did this result in? Well, as we said, congratulations, it's an LMS. This is really when the LMS was born. Now, learning management technology did exist earlier than that, but it really wasn't really well adopted. It wasn't until this time where companies realized they had to report on 100,000 or more employees and their test scores, and they had to give this to the government in order to be compliant. That's when people started purchasing and implementing some sort of learning management technology. Now, whether this was a good thing or not, we can debate, but this is really where the market started to turn. So it's interesting to note. The other thing that came out of this is we started to see, because there were hits, the Articulate platform was launched in 2002. This came out of companies who were looking at their L&D teams and saying, wait a minute, we don't want to just have designers and then developers, we want one person to do that. Cut that by 50%. That was the theory. Or can we make e-learning cheaper for people? If you didn't have an L&D department, well, could you purchase a content library? So Skillsoft, they went for IPO in 2001 amidst that recession, because companies were saying, well, I can't afford L&D, I can afford the licenses. Then if we look at the second wave, we see other things that happened. LinkedIn, it went global during the midst of the 2008 recession, because it was a way for people who were out of jobs to get connected with people who were looking to fill jobs. We also saw too a big boom in these course libraries. Udemy, edX, Coursera, all these were founded just after that time and started their beginnings out of the recession, again, to answer the need for companies who were maybe downsizing their L&D departments or needed a better way to upskill. Again, we can debate whether that was good or not, but the fact is this is where the money and the investment went to. So the next regulatory wave, I actually do see this coming, and this came out just last month. So just like I said before, that banks and insurers had to deal with Sarbanes-Oxley, that act, we're now seeing airlines and restaurants are now in the exact same position. So if I had to, make a wager, I would say that this is going to be another regulatory wave that's going to come that is going to impact people. Just going to pause for a moment here. Is everybody still, if you can enter into the chat pod, still able to hear and see? I think a couple people may have been dropped off. Can you just put in the chat pod a yes or a no? Let's see here. Yes? Everything good? All right. Woohoo! That's excellent. All right. Perfect. So we have this regulatory wave that I predict is going to come, and this is going to mean impacts that where people are going to now have to look at their L&D and say, hey, I now need to have that again because this is something I'm going to need to react to. And besides, who doesn't need a restaurant? Or we want them to revive. I don't think there's a future where we're not going to see these restaurants come back again. So this will happen. And I apologize, this was not a really clear slide. This is the best screenshot that I could get of this, but I really like this example because it's talking about the cycle of change. And it's not something I developed, it's Kubler-Ross, two professors, but they're talking about the transition curve. And we're kind of in, if I look at our industry, we're in about number 2, which is the denial. So we've gone through the shock, the denial, that is this really happening? And we're sort of in between 2 and 3, which is awareness. So we're now saying, okay, we know this is happening, we don't like it. The fact that you're even in this webinar does show that you're shifting more towards 3 and saying, this is frustration, what can I do? But the thing is where you need to be is really a bit further along on that curve. You need to be starting to think now in terms of 5 and 6. And I know that that's incredibly challenging, and I do want to reiterate that we know this is a tough time when you're facing losing your jobs. You've probably got your kids at home, you're worried about your health, the health of your loved ones, all of these things. So I know I'm asking for a lot when I share this, but it's going to be your best bet. So you need to be thinking and looking widely at where are pockets of things happening in L&D, because believe it or not, there actually are. It's just how you position yourself. So let's continue here. So when we talk about how to position yourself, it's not just so much where to go, but I also would caution certain places where you don't want to be. We see right now a lot of companies offering, how, and they're asking for quite a bit of your own investment in terms of time and money to become an expert in converting content to digital. So my thoughts on that would be that's probably a risky bet, and the reason I say this is twofold. One, that's people reacting, trying to keep things normal. Companies are saying, oh, I'll just put everything into digital. That's not being strategic. There's going to be a fatigue on how much digital content and Zoom people can actually consume. We know that that's not the best bet. Secondly, if you upskill in this, sorry, excuse me, everybody else in the industry is doing the same thing. So suddenly you're competing with thousands of other people who have made this same investment in themselves. So that's why I consider it a risky bet. Now, that said, if going to a content factory and converting content is going to help you pay your mortgage or your rent, do it. I totally understand, and no judgment here. In fact, I appreciate why. I would still, though, keep your eyes on what's going to happen medium and longer term so you don't get stuck there. And the reason I say this is because content factories, virtual content, these aren't going to be things that are going to last long term. Our definitions of what these are going to be very different even 6 months from now. Likewise, long form curricula where, companies that are selling things like, leadership and project management, those are going to change. Even our definition of what leadership is going to change. Project management in a virtual environment is going to be very different. I'm not saying that we will never have these again, we will. I just don't predict that in 6 months, these are going to be the big winners in all of this. But again, as I mentioned, do what you need to do to get through from an economic standpoint. Just be advised that these are places where I don't see personally a lot of long-term stability. But I hope I'm wrong. The other thing that you're going to be seeing right now is, every LMS or LXP or whatever, if you look at their marketing, they're going to tell you how many hours people are consuming and that they've had, just millions of people going to their platform and consumption is up and everybody is learning. This is an actual quote from one LMS, which I will not mention the name of, but they're saying 27 million hours in March, okay? This, again, if we think back to that curve, this is where people are in the shock denial sort of phase. So they're trying to keep things as normal as possible. I know a lot of companies who are saying to people, employees who are at home, oh, just take learning to fill your time. This isn't going to be a long-term thing. People are not going to consume at this pace, 3, 4, 5 months from now. There will be a fatigue. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that fatigue will look like. It's not going to go away. It's just, these are unsustainable. So keep in mind that when you look at these metrics that platforms and content providers are putting up on LinkedIn and Twitter, it is actually marketing. And I don't begrudge them that, I get it, but you really need to be wary of making your own career decisions based on some of those things that we're seeing. So hopefully that's clear from that standpoint. Well, let's continue on. So again, in this transition curve, we're still seeing that levels of 1 and 2, and that's where people are sitting right now. They're trying to make things the same as they were before. And we do that because there's an incredible amount of comfort in doing that, right? We feel normal doing that. But it also results in things like, I know somebody right now who, prior to COVID, a leadership meeting had been planned. It was a 3-day offsite leadership where they were going to do all of their annual planning and budget and all that sort of stuff. And that's been converted to a 3-day virtual. And I just think that's punishment for people to have to sit for 3 days and look into a screen. So we have to think differently and manage through things in another way. The other thing too, and this was a really interesting one, and again, I've blocked out the name because I certainly don't want to name and shame, but when you see companies saying we're having so much interest in our courses and things have really improved, well, this is one course provider. It's a large course provider. It has almost 57,000 followers, and it made a post on LinkedIn about, you know, new courses that they're adding to their technology and developer vertical. And it was up for 20 minutes, which I do a lot on LinkedIn. We'll talk about tips for LinkedIn, but you'd think it'd have a lot more engagement. It ended up getting 1 like, and that was from somebody who worked at the company, a salesperson at the company. So again, let's just take things with a grain of salt and understand what maybe is being told to us is not necessarily the reality. So where do I think there will be movement? Okay. Skills libraries and assessments. We're already seeing this. This was a trend before, but here's why it's going to become a trend even quicker. Right now, we're seeing companies where they're having portions of their workforce basically on short-term disability. Unfortunately, either they have caught COVID, they're caring for a family member with COVID, they're in a position where they just can't be present for work for whatever other reason. And so companies are really having to look deep in terms of understanding what skills their employees have and what gaps are going to appear. They also need to understand their skills in their company because they themselves know that they will have to pivot as a result of the pandemic. So that's going to become really fundamental. You're also going to see talent marketplaces emerge. This again was something already existing, but it's going to be, I think, with a lot more speed. This is because as people are within companies, their roles may become diminished. They may not be at utilization. And so they're going to need to be perhaps spread into other roles. We're going to see hybrid positions or people doing roles for short periods of time within their own companies. And that's going to be a way for companies to become more agile, but also to retain their top talent and to diversify. Knowledge management is a really big one from the perspective, as I mentioned before. We have great portions of the workforce who either, as I said, are unable to come into work for a number of reasons. So we have a gap. Their knowledge that they know about their role and about their position within the company, that is a deficit. That's gone when that person leaves. We also are seeing redundancies, and that knowledge goes as that person leaves. So companies are going to be in a scramble to try and make sure that that knowledge is retained and that we don't have corporate amnesia so that that information walks out the door. We're probably also going to see too a lot of people taking early retirement in this phase as companies again look to reduce costs. So those are people who have decades of experience within a company, and that knowledge is going to be leaving. So in order to be agile and to navigate through that, companies are going to be really looking at these things. And this is a little bit different than our traditional L&D. L&D is going to come into this space with, okay, we need to be more aligned with HR. We need to be more aligned with the talent strategy and be very strategic about how we fill those gaps and how we make those things happen. So our LMS or our LXP, whatever we're doing, has to be combined with this. And so you're going to see new solutions come out of this, and it'll be very interesting. So again, if you're looking for career pivoting, that might be a place to keep your eye on. Okay? And the other thing too that we're going to see is there's going to be also too a expectation of consumer grade experience. And I'm going to show an example on the other side. People are going to be spending so much more time in digital that as a result, what they expect, they're going to have a very low threshold. They're going to be expecting that things are really slick and savvy, well designed, they're hyper efficient, and that's going to be a big expectation. So our clunky e-learning is not going to age well. That's another reason why I said previously where you're going to need to be really thinking about what we're doing and learning. Video conferencing is something that's going to rapidly evolve. Zoom, we know it as a tool. It's what we have, and it seems to be the front runner. If you're using, I hate to say, GoToMeeting, I mean, they really missed the boat on this. And some of the video conferencing tools we're going to find are just not fit for purpose. we're making do with them, but there's going to be some disruption. And how we design for video and virtual will have to change. Our best practices that we do right now will be different. We're also going to see Microsoft Suite and others are going to enter into our L&D space. They were already doing this before, but it's going to be hyper focus on that. We're already seeing companies, who are leveraging Teams as now their default. So if you are in L&D and you have time, or you're looking for places to, again, upskill, I would start looking at some of the, Microsoft Suite and others, the G Suite, and start really understanding how those environments function, and start coming up with your own ideas and ways that you see L&D to be merged with that, be it from a data standpoint, be it from a learning content standpoint, be it from a delivery standpoint, all of those ways. It's a really, this is going to be something that will emerge for companies, and they're going to be looking for people who are experts in that space. Security and privacy. These are things that are going to become very, very critical. Zoom had its challenges right in the beginning. We had Zoom bombing. That was why, unfortunately, when we put the call out for people to register, we didn't want to ask you too much information, but we had to have an email address. Otherwise, we would be risking privacy. And there are people who are just looking to cause trouble right now who would Zoom bomb, and we're seeing some bad examples of that. Also some examples of how data of people, in these digital environments, is that being compromised? And that's going to be something that will become a critical piece for L&D. So that's another area where you might want to start reading up on is employee data, learning data, not just from a good side for how we can use it for good, but also some of the ways that we are going to have to think about what that privacy looks like. Should an employer have access to all of your learning history, even things you're doing on your own time? Those are questions that are going to come up, and they will be on hyper focus, especially since we've transitioned so quickly into digital. There's also too, like we've seen in every economic downturn, L&D, we have to show our value and efficiencies. This is always true, but it's going to be something that it's going to be even more critical, because when they look at spreadsheets, they look at numbers, and they look at where they want to dismiss and save, it's L&D is going to be the one if we're not in a position to show ourselves. And I am very sorry if you have already found yourself in that position, because we see this is what I talked about video conferencing. This actually just happened yesterday. So Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, made, that very scary man, made an announcement that they were going to build a better video conferencing platform. And immediately, Zoom's stock, it just tumbled after Facebook's announcement. So this is the level of disruption we're starting to see. I mean, you'd think Zoom right now, there's been jokes that were they the ones that released COVID. I'm not at all suggesting that, but because their business has absolutely boomed. And that's a place also too, if I were in L&D, I might be thinking about, ways that we use Zoom better for L&D and looking at some of the opportunities there. They are in, hyper growth mode. And as we're going to see, Facebook is doing the same thing. So that's going to really, really change the landscape. And so that's why when I said earlier, pause on getting that diploma and how to convert to digital, because really when this competition happens and when these types of new players enter the space, what digital looks like is going to change. And so what you learn as best practices now might not be applicable when we see these new tools emerge. Maybe a good base, but you're also going to need to keep in mind that you're going to have to adapt very quickly to some of these new things. So I'm going to pause there because we're gone for about 30 minutes. Just want to see if there are any questions, comments, anything in the chat. If you want me to go faster, slower, anything you wanted me to clarify. And again, there is also a private chat function if you don't want to share your name or any other details. So please feel free to add that in. I'll just pause for a moment. Excellent question, Joanne. Where does onboarding fit in? And I'm going to talk about some industries where we are seeing hyper onboarding. There are quite a few, and that is a great place for L&D professionals to go. It really, really is, and we are seeing those pockets start. So I'm going to give you a list and a few slides from here on where you want to go. Elena here says it was a response to governance, yes, to accounting scandals, but that was only part of it. Sarbanes-Oxley had actually a much large effect. What it did result in is we had to do a lot of regulatory training to ensure that we were in compliance with those. And we're seeing that, that it's not health and safety, but if you look at the financial situation that restaurants have found themselves in, they have been basically doing buybacks on shares. I won't go into all the accounting, but it is a similar situation. I apologize, I didn't explain that very well. But my point is that we're going to see a wave of compliance come out of that that's going to hit those industries. And that's really what is the impetus for a rebound for L&Ds to start being reintroduced as a priority in that area. Will OD become important? Absolutely, especially think about those talent marketplaces, which will probably become far more prevalent in the industry. So that absolutely. There's one here, cybersecurity awareness. Yes, this is absolutely, and learning artifacts that capture complex data on learner performance. Absolutely, those are all going to be quite prevalent. Another thing too, this is a great time to be in L&D. It actually is. You know, some industries are, I really do, and it's not because I'm biased, because I'm in the industry, but I posted about this before on LinkedIn and Twitter, is that, you know, education and miseducation and a lack of education is what got us into this mess. L&D is actually incredibly skilled to work well in this place. And yes, I'll actually be talking about what you should be focusing on in terms of upskilling in a few slides. Change management is a very good place to be, and absolutely. What I would just caution is, you know, we already are in change. So you got to think about, have we missed that curve? Are we going to be in perpetual change? So that's something that will happen. And Paul, absolutely, facilitation, it's not going to go away. We are humans, we learn from each other. It may mean for a while that it is digital, you know, facilitation, but I do not see face-to-face ever going away, It's not going to happen. It will come back. It's a question of when. Will there ever be the same user experience for learning via Zoom versus blended and face-to-face? This is where I think, I'm saying, you know, the technology is going to change, you know, with Facebook entering and Zoom, and there's going to be, and I imagine there'll be also too a disruptor from a place we didn't even see that's going to change what those, you know, what this is going to look like. So I don't have the technology predictions. I'm not that smart. I just really see that we're going to see huge development in that area to make better experiences for people. Yeah, and really important point from Peter. Yeah, how we went from L&D not being important to first responders. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, we have here, OD is the most worried about job security in HR division. You know what, that's a good point. You know, I personally still put my bets in it. But you know what, again, I'm one person, and it's just based on my own experience, but I think it's just going to evolve in terms of that talent marketplace, and where people are going to be wearing multiple hats and moving within companies. A question here, to make strategies that ensure all learners are acquiring knowledge within digital onboarding. It is going to be a challenge. You are absolutely right. We're going to have to learn through this, and it's going to be difficult. But we are the experts in this. What we just have to make sure those we don't get too stuck in our own old ways, and that we are open about what is out there, and that we're willing to pivot quite quickly. So we've had a really good discussion. I want to make sure we do get into some of those other comments or the other content, so I make sure I address your feedback here. So a question was asked about which industries will win. And win is kind of a bad, maybe not the best term, my apologies. But this is where we're seeing that there is increased onboarding, and they are going to need L&D services. Sanitation, we're already seeing pop-up companies, disruptors coming in who, it might become, a normal practice that overnight there's a sanitation crew that, deep cleans your storefront, every day. And that might be normal, or UV lighting that just is installed. All of these things are going to need onboarding. You're going to need people doing this. Pharma and healthcare, absolutely. This is something that is going to be needed. Grocery stores, we see right now some grocery stores are hiring in the thousands of people. Food supply, they will need L&D. They will need upskilling. They will, as also too, they evolve in the ways that they, work. They're going to need L&D to be extremely agile as they implement new processes on a daily basis. Telecommunications, really, really key here. And again, L&D needs to be a part of that. Cloud computing, e-payments, e-commerce, all of those things are going to be really key. And also too, interestingly enough, I would predict in this particular one would be a lot of customer education, which is something L&D doesn't always think about. We think a lot about how we upskill employees, but in all of these, there's also going to need ways that customers are upskilled so that they're able to use these new types of technology. And that is a learning function. Logistics, all of logistics are going to are going through a rapid overhaul, and that is a place again where L&D needs to be focused. Security and cybersecurity is going to be huge. Although I joke right now, probably it's a really bad time to be a house burglar. I was in a Facebook group for my neighborhood, and somebody was posting a picture of a person who was walking around the neighborhood and worried they were maybe looking into houses or casing houses. And I thought, that's not a very smart person, because everybody, literally everybody, is home for 23 hours a day. But anyway, that's a bad joke. But these are still, cybersecurity is going to become huge. We're going to find more people as everything goes to digital. It's going to be very critical that those are secure. And again, it's a place where L&D will be essential. So the thing though with L&D is we will have competition in terms of content. So if you haven't had a chance, if you go on YouTube, they actually now have learning channels. These are free, and they're pretty damn good. So this is one on the Berlin Wall. So as you can see, it's quite sleek. It was actually a virtual experience. So you could actually also too have a headset. And you can see here you have 3 characters, and they are going through what the Berlin Wall looked like. They recreated what the Berlin Wall looked like, and they included archival footage that you also see here of the wall actually coming down. They have a historian. It's high grade. It's high definition. So it's really quite slick. And these are for free. And this one had only been up for a few months, and it's viewed in the millions. I mean, they even have an actor with blue hair. I mean, you can't beat that. And then compare. I looked at e-learning for apologies here, e-learning for the Berlin Wall. And now this is a really bad example, but it did make me laugh because this is sometimes how L&D approaches things, right? And we look at the facts. We're not looking at the context. And when I said before that our learners are going to be expecting consumer grade, their threshold for what we build and what we provide to them is going to be, that bar is going to be so high, and we have to meet that. Otherwise, we're going to become absolutely irrelevant. So that's why when we look at what new skills, when people say, well, what do I invest in? These are some, there are a lot of others, but these are some that we predict are going to become quite critical. Videography and graphic design, I know why we use rapid authoring tools, but in the wrong hands, they can go incredibly wrong. We need to learn some of those basic principles so that when people go in, it's very similar to the experience that they get when they go to a news website or any other multimedia site, that it's that high grade, it looks good, the video's not, shaky, it's an overall good experience. Now, that said, I do give some forgiveness that sometimes, just rough and ready content is also very good, but you have to know when to use it. Some YouTube videos are just somebody standing against a green screen, and it's still good content. but it's good content. That's the big thing here. So this, if you are so inclined towards that, this is a good space I would recommend to get involved. Data analytics is going to be, it was big before on the LPI's, or John Taylor's annual report for learning technologies. You know, data is always at the top. You're hearing it over and over again. Now is the time to really understand data analytics for learning, and in particular, data analytics privacy, which is something that hasn't been focused on, but is something that will need to be focused on. And that, I predict, will be quite a hot space. Journalism. The way that we write for digital for learning, it really needs to mimic, again, that consumer grade experience. It doesn't take a lot of time to learn the inverted pyramid of content writing, so would highly recommend that, you know, take some time to do that. How to write with clarity and purpose. If you're already doing that, great, but if not, this is a quick win. Community engagement management. This is a time now for you to shine. If you have a learning experience platform, or if you have a platform within your company that people are using, like a Yammer or whatever, dive in and start adding value. You can do that, you know, you can learn about it, but you can also too dive in and say, you know, connect people with content, connect people to people. You know, same as you would do on LinkedIn, do that within your own ecosystem. It's also too a great way for you to get noticed. Leadership pays attention to those things. So if you're showing that you're doing things differently for L&D by doing community engagement, that's a really good one. Performance consulting, it's a skill we always should have had, but you know, it's an old one, but we don't do it well. Everyone says they do, they don't. We still build a lot of garbage. You know, the number of people I know right now that are building modules on wellness, that's the most ridiculous thing right now. Curate, we don't need that. Learning experience design, I won't go into what that is because I'm sure as L&D professionals you know, but you want to broaden in there. And marketing is a big one. Now, there are a lot of other ones that are more HR directed. I am not an HR expert. It's only what I see, but these are some of the ones that we, you know, think are quick wins for people to get upskilled in. Change management was one that also came up there, yes. But as I said, we need to think about, have we possibly missed the change curve because we're changing already? But I think also ongoing change, perpetual change is something that we need to think about. If you're in a position where you maybe haven't lost your job, but you're very worried about becoming irrelevant, there are things you can do right now. You need to now talk to your CEO or get aligned to them. You might say, I don't have that contact, get as close as possible. And you need to talk to them about what you can do strategically. This is going to be a time where you can shine. So don't run off and try and, you know, build, you know, COVID-19 modules or how to wash your hands. Don't do that. You need to focus all of your learning efforts only on business goals. And in addition to that, understand how those business goals have changed, because certainly your C-suite has pivoted in this difficult time. If you can't get into your C-suite to find out how those have changed, talk to your project management office. They will tell you what projects have been put on hold. And so that's another way for you to really understand what the business goals are. But you're going to need to really, really focus all efforts on where you add strategic value. Only take on initiatives where you have evidence that there's a need and you can measure the outcomes. This is because you're going to need to be able to show this is where we are moving the needle. And resources instead of courses. None of this should be new, but you're going to need to do this on warp speed, and you're going to need to be vocal about it. When you have a win, you need to tell people about it. Make sure that you're not just waiting for that annual report of, you know, how many hours you delivered. You're doing this on an ongoing basis. And this I can't promise anything, but is one way that I've had to save teams by doing this, and it's worked well for me in the past. So what I'm going to do here is very quickly put this over to my my colleague Amanda, who's going to talk about some of the things here right now. Let me just see if I can get Amanda unmuted.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So thank you, Laurie, for the heavy lifting there. I'm not going to talk for 45 minutes, so you can get some water, Laurie. But I did want to just give some people some actionable advice if they might be either out of a job or suspecting that redundancies are in their future, or maybe you're just looking for a job change. Because actually both Laurie and I have pivoted quite a few times over the course of our careers, and so we thought some of this could be helpful to you. So first of all, a lot of people do reach out to us. We're not career coaches, but ask for advice around what they might do with their careers. And the number one thing I tell people is do not wait for job opportunities or job openings to fall in your lap. The fact of the matter is most good jobs are never posted at all, or in fact, they might not even exist yet. So just to tell you a story about my own career, I actually was reflecting, and I have never gotten a job because I applied for it on a company's website or LinkedIn. It's always, for me anyway, it's been about being proactive. In one case, I was working for a learning technology company, language learning, in fact, and I realized that there was an opportunity for next generation learning technologies, right? So LXPs. And because I saw this opportunity, I educated myself about them. And then rather than waiting for these companies to post openings, what I did was I reached out proactively to the CEO or the person that could hire me in these companies. And ultimately, of the 4 companies that I reached out to, 3 of them did offer to hire me and create a role that didn't exist, and certainly didn't exist for someone who was living in Madrid, because these were companies based in other cities in the world. So really, just be proactive and don't waste too much time on those job boards. Another thing I'd say is you are not your current job title or your past experience. Obviously, all that is very important, but more importantly is who do you want to be next, okay? So be open to new roles, new industries. Think about, as Lori said before, which industries might come out of COVID, not winning, but in a decent position to be hiring. And then to think about global opportunities. Don't limit yourself to the place where you live, because one positive thing about this pandemic might be that companies will be more open-minded when it comes to hiring remote workers and put together remote teams. And the other thing is, and this really comes from sales, and I do have a background in sales myself, and so I wanted to share this with you. I encourage you to ask yourself what your value proposition is. Okay, so what is it that you have that can uniquely add value to the company that you want to work for? Think about what your strengths are. Now, that might seem easy, but actually it's not easy at all. So oftentimes when we're really good at something, we don't even realize that it's our superpower. So if you can't look in the mirror and see what you're good at, ask your friends, ask people that you trust, ask a mentor, go to a career coach if you have that option. In fact, some of you that might be facing redundancy, you could ask your employer if there are career coaches or any other kind of support available as you transition. So speaking of value proposition, since you might not be familiar about what that is, I just wanted to share this visual. So it's really, again, I mean, this is built for sales, not for people looking for jobs. But if you think about the customer as the company that you would like to hire you, and you are the product, I think you get the metaphor, right? So what can you contribute? What do they really need? What is the problem that you will be solving for them? Okay. Finally, Lori, if you want to go to the next slide. Some more tips. If you want to advance in your career, fake it till you make it. Sometimes you just have to make the leap. If you're an instructional designer today and you want to be a learning experience designer tomorrow, or something totally different, you have to really just take that leap and don't be afraid. Another point, so you might be an entrepreneur, but not everyone is. What do I mean by that? Well, I've talked to several people lately who are considering going independent because either they've lost their job or they just want to explore that. And I think that's great for a lot of people. But one thing you have to realize is a lot of what it means to be an entrepreneur is knowing how to sell your services. It's not just good enough to be good at your job and what you do. You also have to be able to get business. So have a long think about that before you jump in. Next, the power of the network. I really, really believe in this. Cultivate your network. Most of the time, there's lots of research about this, that it's who you know and the connections that you have that at least can open doors for you to get jobs. And don't be afraid of strangers. So, on LinkedIn is a great tool, or just through your network. it doesn't matter if you don't know someone. If you approach them respectfully, explain what it is that you're looking for, and hopefully add some value of your own, people are quite open to connecting to others that they have never met. Last but not least here, personal branding. Okay, so this is really critical. And what this is about is think about who you uniquely are, what value can you add, right? And then align that to how you want to be perceived. And this is something you have to work at, right? And thanks to social media tools, our window to the world is bigger than ever. And that brings me to my last point. This may be a bit extreme, but I do believe the CV is dead. Long live LinkedIn. Really, it's if you have it all on there and you work on your personal brand on there, that's really the only calling card I believe you need. So forget about those job boards. Be proactive, reach out, grow your network, ask for help, and think about the value you can uniquely add. A question here, what if I say my value proposition is communication and good at facilitation? Will I be needed still? Absolutely. I mean, like Laura said, facilitation is not going to go away. I think we're going to see more virtual facilitation and people who are experts at that for sure. But communication, as far as I'm concerned, that's a universal skill. It's just about how you can add value with communication in the new world, I'd say.
I'd also add into that, Paul, you're being good at communication, good at facilitation, there's going to be, it may not be that for a while that you're facilitating in front of a classroom, but there's other opportunities. It may be communicating change. It may be coaching people on how to communicate change and to deal sensitivity on, in these difficult times. Some of the advertising or communications I see in this space right now are so tone deaf. So those are skills that you have. So you could absolutely do that.
Yeah. And bring what I said about LinkedIn, I think I just want to stress how important I believe that is. That is the one spot where every recruiter is going, whether or not there is a job posting that you've identified, and that can be your calling card. So Lori, I think is going to share some tips.
Yes. Yes. 1 second here. Yep. Okay, so tips for LinkedIn. This just comes from experience and a little bit of insight because I did a course for LinkedIn, so I got to go onto their campus and found out how the sausage is made, shall we say. One thing we discourage is to have right away looking for next opportunity in your job title. It makes people reluctant to connect with you. You can turn on looking for opportunities mode, and that's for so recruiters can see it, but not your wider network doesn't see it. But putting that in right away, it's kind of like, putting in your dating profile that, you're looking to get married, right? That's so worry about that. To get noticed, hashtags are very important. This was a hack that I got from John Hinchcliffe. He's somebody to follow. He's amazing. Education, for example, has 10 times the following than learning. Once I added education, I was getting a whole new group of people who were commenting and engaging with my posts. So
I did recently read as well, Lori, that 3 hashtags is the recommended number. Just throwing it out there in case that's true.
I've heard different things on that. I think it's more that hashtags are important. I wouldn't be putting more than like 7 because then you just are blasting. I know some people who put like 20 and I don't see them having any value from it, and it actually gets a bit annoying. So maybe 3 is a good number, but I wouldn't put too many. Is the most important part, and use them. Don't ever not put out a hashtag. User-generated content is really, really critical. The thing is, though, if you're going to write an article, that does take a lot of time, and I find that if I write an article, at first it takes a long time to get views. Now I get them, but I had to write about 30 of them. A well-written post, that's a bit of a longer form post, so something that's in the rounds of about 180 words usually is a really good sweet spot. Never post more than once a day. The algorithms will push you down. And try and aim for about 2 or 3 posts a week if that's your thing. If it's not your thing, don't force yourself to do it. And don't put up something just because you think you should, just because you want to, be noisy. I know a lot of people who do that, and people get really annoyed quickly. If you haven't used it already, there's a free premium trial. I don't work for LinkedIn, just saying this is the tool we have. shares do not perform well. We find that it just doesn't. So if you see content that you like and you want to share, cut and paste it, put it in, tag the original poster, and share that way. They do really, really well. And remember too, it's a two-way street. It's you want to engage with other people's content as well. You know, comment, and engage, ask questions, because it's not just about you, and use it as a true learning tool. So those are some of the things that we start to see. And finally, with LinkedIn, there's also to pay attention to the data. So when you do put up a post, this was one that I did a couple of weeks ago, you can look at the views. You can see where people have come from, who have viewed it, what companies they're at, which geography they're at, what titles they had, and that can help you use those insights to make decisions about what your future posts will be. Because then you'll start to see. So here we had about 25,000 views, and it gives me a breakdown. So I pay attention to those breakdowns, and it's not only interesting, but then the next time I want to post something, I'm thinking about this and the people I want to target. Okay. Finally, we do want to leave you with some places that you can go. Probably the biggest one right now is the last one that I just put up. If you go to David D'Souza, he's the membership director of CIPD. He is putting together a database to connect people seeking work with recruiters, specifically in HR and L&D and OD. So highly recommend doing that. Our part is also to see if we can get more recruiters into that database, so that we get some things happening there. Career Curves by Beth Loeb Davies is well worth a listen. It's people who've had to do massive shifts in their career. There's the LPI Learn, which was just launched. There's a lot of good resources on that touch on some of the skills that we said that you need to think about. The Learning and Development Podcast, if you aren't already listening, has some good ones, as well as Learning Tech Talks by Christopher Lind. Also, LinkedIn Learning, has some great stuff for L&D that you might want to have a look at. Quick hits. If anything, it just gives you an idea of what is out there.
Another thing I would really recommend is to cultivate a list of people on LinkedIn that you can learn from. So you can either connect with them, don't be shy, like I said, don't be afraid of strangers, they might connect with you, but at the very least, you can just follow them. And that's, for me, one of my #1 sources of learning.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll add with this is one specific time when I did have to pivot. I was at a role. It was 4 years ago. So if anyone wants to look in my LinkedIn profile and find out where it was KPMG. And I was really unhappy in that role. I wasn't getting opportunities. I was told I couldn't write. I was told I wasn't a collaborator. I wasn't strategic. It just was overall. I couldn't believe it, and so I knew I had to pivot. And one of the things they did is they said they didn't want me posting on LinkedIn. They froze that. Now I don't know what their policy is, but at the time it was that. And so I resigned from there. And as soon as I went on LinkedIn, and I started to cultivate a voice with honesty, with my own opinions, and I didn't filter myself, that was when the opportunities that really played to my strengths came to me. People, would look at my profile and they would, sometimes they'd be turned off by it, which is fine. I wanted that. And then there were people who were like, no, I really like that type of thinking. And so it helped me land in places that played to my strengths, as opposed to me getting yet another job where people kind of thought I would be one thing when I was actually something quite different. So I encourage you to be honest and get that voice.
Absolutely. When it comes to your personal brand, you can't be everything to everybody, right? Yeah. At the end of the day, if you're not being honest, you're not being true to who you are and what you have to offer, you're not going to end up in an organization that's the right fit for you.
So we're 1 minute left. I'm more than happy, I know Amanda is as well, to stay on. If there are any questions or any comments you want to add into the chat, now's a great time. Or if you want to meet with us personally, there's, please do so. Here's our contact details. Oh, wash your hands. And here are our contact details. But we're here. If we can help, now is the time. Okay, so question that came, so Peter said here, short sims, yep, absolutely. And any certifications to possess right now? I think it's, certifications, it's, for me, are only one part of it. It's more about demonstrating what you can do. I wouldn't, I really would be focused more on that side of things, where you can show that you've done stuff, where you can prove that you've done something, rather than you know, letters after you or something like that. That's my 2 cents. You know, it's always good to upskill. You know, look for the right opportunity, but you know, it's more about what you can do. And thank you for the kind words, everyone, that if you've enjoyed it. You know, this was intended to help, and you know, this is key. Oh, Paul says here, most of the stuff will be new and we don't have prior experience. Okay, that's true. You may want to look into your virtual facilitation, but understanding too, all of the things I said before, that it's going to change. You're in communication, so I would play to those strengths.
Yeah. But also, yeah, you're not going to be an expert in anything on day one. Nobody ever is. And so there is a component of upskilling yourself enough, but then you do have to take the leap and fake it till you make it, like I said before.
Yeah. Excellent. And thank you, everyone, for the comments. I'm just reading through them. I can't read and talk at the same time. Trying blah, 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 blah. Oh, and I see some people will be at the I4PL session in May. Yep, we'll be talking about some of these things. Actually, it'll be an update. The world will change by May, and you know, we'll see what happens there. Oh, thanks for the kind words, Thomas. That's great. Hi, Raj. Great to see you. And most of all, to everyone, please stay healthy. You know, this is the most important thing. Look after yourself and others, and take care of your mental health too. These are really, really difficult.
Be kind to yourself. Let your kids play on their iPad as much as you need to. That's what I'm doing to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So thank you, everyone, and you know, take care. Take care. We'll end the session. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot for giving us an hour of your time.
Thank you. Bye now.